Hello, Garland Nixon here with my guest once again, Dr. Radhika Desai. She's absolutely wonderful. I learned a lot from her. We're going to talk about multipolarity. We're going to talk about economics and what seems to be somewhat of a expected revolt against the ruling elite. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here. I'm back with Dr. Desai, and those who watch my channel know that a week or so ago, we started to do a video where we were talking about the Trump administration, multipolarity and economics, and we had some technical difficulties, a few little StreamYard difficulties. So we're going to get back on that. We've got some other things happening, but so for those who tried to watch that video and really, struggled because of the technical difficulties, we'll fingers crossed, we'll get back to it now and things will work out well. Dr. Desai, welcome back to my humble YouTube channel.
Thanks so much, Garland. And unless you call me Radhika, I'm going to call you Mr. Nixon.
Oh my gosh, please don't do that. It makes me feel old. And there's nothing worse than feeling old when you actually are old. Okay, let's roll. Before we get going, I'd like to throw something out at you that I've been throwing out at my other guests. The shooting of the CEO in New York, and to many, maybe even me, was the shocking outcry of support. I'll put that online amongst the working class. One of the things that was like highly searched, one of the terms was jury nullification. You had all of these discussions of people saying, well, if I was on the jury, I could care less. Of course he did it. Of course he's guilty. I'd find him not guilty. This feeling amongst the discussion about particularly the industry he was in and how that makes money. People would talk about the deaths, the tens of thousands of deaths each year from healthcare companies not approving procedures and medication for people. So you see where I'm going. Many people, including me, were surprised that all of these working class people showed their fury. They demonstrated their fury and anger at the ruling elite and disdain for this guy. It was kind of like yeah, those are the ruling elite. Who cares? They got what they got coming to them. It sounded like the pitchforks and the and the torches and, dare I say, the guillotines are being warmed up. Your thoughts?
Well, exactly. I think that was my reaction. And I also read, like you, some of the horrifying statistics about the number of people who routinely die in the United States because of the commercialization and corporatization of the American health sector. That is to say, the American health sector is largely a for-profit enterprise. Indeed, even Obamacare, which we are told was such a great and wonderful and liberatory thing, was actually not so much a bonanza for ordinary working people and their health. It was a bonanza for the insurance industry. And so when you take all these things into account, I think it shows you the level of disaffection between ordinary people and the ruling class. I mean, basically, people are just fed up. They realize that their ruling class is just out to get them. In fact, there was one thing that I was reminded of very clearly. Mrs. Thatcher died like a couple of decades after she left office. She died maybe 10 years ago or so now. But what I remember being shocked at the fact that British people, ordinary British people, came out on the streets and celebrated the day she died. One is brought up being told one should not speak ill of the dead and blah, blah, and so on. But people are people and they're going to do what they feel. I mean, at some level, many people will act out what they feel, and they were celebrating, saying things like the Wicked Witch is dead and so on. And now what we are seeing is that it's not just the right wing of the political establishment of the Reagan and Thatcher types, because of course in the intervening period, what has happened is that the so-called liberals, the Democrats, whatever you call them in the United States, the so-called left wing, have also become completely neoliberal. They have sold out to the corporate agenda. In the name of doing good for people, they have delivered more and more corporate bonanzas, of which Obamacare is a prime example. And so people realize the level of hypocrisy of the Bidens and the Harris types and the Obama types and the Clinton types. So they see right through it. And that's what you're looking at. You're looking at a level of disaffection which is enormous. And unfortunately, and because this is kind of also segueing into the conversation we are going to have about Trump and his appointees and so on, unfortunately, because the left has been so much under attack and essentially has been stamped out of existence, the only people who benefit from, or the only political currents that benefit from this kind of disaffection with the political establishment are right wing, even further right wing upstarts like Trump. So he's able to win elections by exploiting the anger against the establishment, and he has already ruined the Republican establishment. And it is very likely that his victory against Harris will ruin the Democratic establishment. So both establishments of both parties will then have been discredited, and hopefully by that time we will have some sort of real left-wing movement emerging. But until then, we are looking at essentially one type of hypocrisy and another type of fraud, and you got to choose between them.
I saw, in fact, I saw the Trump, I can tie the Trump election to this, because I don't know how many people I talk to, and I've often said this, people in the Black community, what do you think of Trump? They didn't like him. Who are you voting for? Trump. Why? And it was basically, I saw a couple of things. Number one, desperation, as Malcolm X said about the field slave, always bring it up. When someone said, would you like to run away? He would say, any place is better than here. I always remember that. And when people are in misery, any place is better than here. And so I got that. The other thing there that I got was, I think, a feeling, and I kind of felt this about Brexit, and that is, part of this, the fury of the ruling elite. The ruling elite made it clear they didn't want Trump. We hate his guts. We want to try. We want to do anything to stop Trump. And there was a feeling that, you know what, I may not be able to do anything. And I don't like Trump. I don't think he's going to fix things, but they don't want him. Yeah. There's only one thing. I have no power, but there's one thing I can do to take a punch at them, to take a swipe at them. And that's vote for fill in the blank. And it's almost like the more they said, oh, this guy's terrible, he's Hitler, he's horrible, he's the worst, we don't want him, there was a feeling like you really don't want him. That's the only way I can exercise power, is to vote for somebody that you don't want. I don't think I'll get anything out of it, don't even care. But like somebody just takes a swing, who cares? As long as I get a punch in, that then I'll at least I'll have gotten something. Do you understand what I'm getting at?
Absolutely. And, that prompts me to think something, Garland, you were saying, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think the people recognize that Trump is an anti-establishment figure. At least that's how he poses in front of the people in order to win their votes. So he says, I'm going to stop all the wars, and I'm going to, do all sorts of things that I'm going to drill, baby, drill, and I'm going to, reduce regulations and all the things that the establishment claims hypocritically to do, because the establishment claims to be regulating corporate capital, but in reality, they are giving corporate capital so many sweet deals and so on. But nevertheless, Trump wins by appearing to be against these sorts of things. But now I think what we'll see is something really interesting. So on his way to the White House, he was supported by all the maverick capitalist. Earlier in that truncated show that we did, we were talking about how William Galston some years ago, I think, distinguished between the so-called house-trained capitalists, that is to say, the kind of tame, domesticated capitalists who belong to the political establishment, and the maverick capitalists and CEOs like Elon Musk and what have you, Peter Thiel and Vivek Ramaswamy and whatever. They all belong to this other set of maverick or cowboy capitalists who are, so these the second type of capitalist, the mavericks, supported Trump on his way to the White House. But now what we are seeing is that all the other guys, seeing who has been the winner, who is going to be in the White House with his fingers on all the purse strings of the administration, once they see that, they're all coming around. The people are donating to his inauguration fund and probably whole sorts of other funds that he will need. So it's going to be interesting to see exactly how anti-establishment the Trump administration is. We were told that last time when Trump was elected in 2016, he had to still defer to some extent to the Republican establishment. Clearly, he doesn't have to do that now. But he's certainly being given every opportunity to defer to the big CEOs who had hitherto sided with the Harris variety of politician, the Obamas, the Clintons, the Harris varieties, the Bidens, and now they're all coming around to Trump. And I also find it very interesting and amusing that even outlets like The Guardian and the Financial Times, which are fully paid up members of the political establishment, of the Anglo-American political establishment, they are also publishing stories about how, giving the health department to Robert Kennedy Jr. might not be half bad, despite his anti-vax opinions, because after all, he does have some interesting points to make about the problems in the American health sector. We now circle back to health, but yes. So it's going to be really interesting which way, Trump is a weather vane character. So it'll be interesting to see, which part of the American CEO establishment is blowing harder than which others. Yeah.
One of the things, to throw this in there, that I predicted, and we're going to get to his people in a second, and his administration, but I think this is important, particularly with your ties to Europe and your knowledge of the political and economic landscape in Europe. The ruling elite in Europe prior to, we saw this thing where they were like, oh my gosh, we've all got to gather together to stop Trump. The Green Party's calling Jill Stein, you've got to drop out to stop Trump. The, Keir Starmer and his crew, oh, we'll send our people over to everybody stop Trump. And when that happened, people were like, oh, that's going to be a time. And I said, I don't think so. I think when Trump comes in, the ruling elite in Europe will be clamoring to bend their knee and kiss his ring. They don't want him to be the leader of the empire, but they understand the dynamics of empire. And when he wins, they'll say, well, there's a new sheriff in town. And the game they play is they'll come to Trump and they'll say, hey, man, we, hope it wasn't out of line with those remarks about you being a fascist and Hitler. You are the boss now, and we're going to follow you. And for now, Biden's still in, and oh, yes, we've got to continue with Ukraine, and we've got all those things. But my feelings that the ruling elite will jump in line, that they will, we've seen Mark Zuckerberg come over. Here's $1 million, Trump. And do you feel that the ruling elite in Europe will fight him? Will they be divided? Or do you think my feelings that they're just going to say, we got a new emperor. All right, guys, get in line. We got to follow this emperor. You know the game. Which do you think it'll be, or some combination thereof?
I think that, okay, so first of all, the bending of knee and kissing of ring is already happening. I mean, Keir Starmer, members of whose cabinet have said the nastiest things possible about Trump, essentially congratulated, we are told in the readout of the telephone call, congratulated Donald Trump exuberantly or something like that, which UK prime ministers with their stiff upper lips almost never do. But nevertheless, so he's already done that, and clearly he has gone bent over backwards just in order to compensate for all the terrible things that he and his mates have said about Trump. So that's already happening, and I think it will happen. There's absolutely no doubt that it will happen. I mean, our Canada's Trudeau, of course, has gone running to meet with him and so on. But I think they will be up against something different now, because the fact is that while Biden engaged in the rhetoric of American, power, and how his administration has united America's allies like never before, and so on, The fact is that America's pockets are getting emptier by the day. America doesn't have very much to give to Europe. Already under Biden, we were looking at scenarios in which Europe was going to have to pay for the cleanup, the post-Ukraine cleanup, and so on. And that, to some extent, is already happening. So I think that the real tension will be not so much, even if they swallow all their pride, which they will. I mean, they're complete knaves and charlatans. But even if they do swallow all their pride and they go and kowtow to Trump, they're not going to get very much for it, because what we are looking at is really the ongoing process of the disintegration of American power. It's not doing it very graciously. It will cause a lot of problems on its way out, but nevertheless, it is disintegrating. I mean, for example, we are told that the narrative on the events in Syria is that Israel and the US have won and Russia and Iran have lost. But I think the situation is much more complicated than that. Not only is Turkey the sort of pig in the middle, but there's a whole lot of other things going on, which I would say are going to show that the United States is not in control of the situation in Syria. And I think similar things are going to happen vis-a-vis Ukraine and Russia and Europe as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I think the perpetrators of this evil deed in Syria are going to rue the day that they did it. You're going to have an ISIS terrorist state on your border. Who wants that next door? And might I add, they're pretending that they're going to have some kind of a unified government. The thing about these fascists, their history tells us, and as a famous football coach here said, you are what your record says you are, right? The history of these types of groups tells us that once they come into power, if that's the right word, they fight amongst each other. So there will be groups saying, sure, we'll go along with the imperialists. Yes, Israel will work with him. Turkey will work with him. But within that, there'll be other large groups that say, no, you're not pure enough. We hate Israel, Turkey, whatever, and we've got to attack them also. And if they have bases or whatever, they will be attacked by factions who will then fight other factions. And they have started a mess.
Yes,
that
absolutely.
will not easily be resolved. Okay, let's go to multipolarity in the new Trump administration. One of the interesting things that I'd like to get your talk on. So Donald Trump, the person who thinks everybody, who only has a hammer thinks everything is a nail. So here's what we've heard things like this from Trump. Yes, if somebody wants to get rid of the dollar, we'll sanction them. And I'm thinking, gee, that sounds like they're leaving the dollar because of sanctions, and your plan is to sanction them. Now, if you understand Trump, you understand that that's Trump's kind of bar. He always starts maximalist. I'm going to sanction you. I'm going to take you. I'm going to crush you. And then he works backwards from there. That's his negotiating tactics every time. So I don't pay attention to his rhetoric. It's always going to be maximalist. But it still shows that he doesn't understand that U.S. power is much less, and that he has to be much more tactical and technical in his negotiation. Instead, he still thinks he has a big fist that he can go. Anyway, so your thoughts on the Trump style, the Trump administration, the people that he have chosen, and what you think that means about his ability to interact with BRICS, SCO, international economics.
Well, okay. So, the last bit is huge. So let me just be very specific and begin with the tariffs thing. So obviously, I think that, as you rightly say, I mean, the whole thing about the tariffs that he's threatening vis-a-vis the dollar. I mean, you got it in one. I mean, what's the point of imposing sanctions, that is to say tariffs, when the people are, in order to defend the dollar, when in fact it is precisely this sort of action on the part of the United States that's prompting people to try to find ways out of the dollar system. And I would say that it's going to be counterproductive on that front. But I would say it's going to be counterproductive on another front, which is that he has, before the latest tariff threats around the dollar system, earlier he was threatening 20 and 30% tariffs on this or that country and so on. But the fact is, particularly vis-a-vis China, Mexico, Canada, etc., these are the countries that the United States trades with most heavily. If he were to impose such tariffs, the almost immediate result of the sort that he's threatening, even without the 100% tariffs, the lower tariffs, it's going to lead to a massive increase in prices and therefore massive increase in inflation. And part of the reason why why voters favored him is that they associated Trump with lower prices, with less inflation. Of course, it wasn't Trump's doing. It just happened to be the case. But nevertheless, they associate him with a time of lower inflation, whereas the Biden Harris team lost because they are associated with a period of higher inflation, etc. So I would say certainly that's going to be counterproductive. And of course, speaking of his style and his threats, the threat to deport 11 million allegedly illegal migrants is going to have the same effect. Much as we wish it were otherwise, the fact is that these immigrants, whether they are illegal or not, God knows, but these immigrants are the ones who are keeping the cost of labor down in the United States. As I say, we wish it were not so, but that is the way it is. And if they leave and their jobs were taken by others or were not taken, that will again lead to a rise in inflation that is going to redound badly on the administration. So on both of these counts, so that's one set of considerations, that there will be higher inflation. Secondly, the very CEOs on whose support Trump, in whose support, rather, I should say, Trump is currently reveling, holding court at Mar-a-Lago, seeing this CEO today and that CEO that afternoon and this morning and so on. These are the very people who will be saying to him, President-elect Trump, we hope that you don't, we hope you'll find a way around these tariffs and these deportations, because they are the ones who will face higher input costs, and they don't want to see that. So again, they will be the ones, and of course, naturally, nor do they want to have relations with the countries with which they must work, whether it is Mexico or Canada or most importantly, China, to be so bad that there is no room for negotiation. So again, the very CEOs on whom Trump depends will be advising him otherwise. So basically, I think in all of these cases, we will see a situation in which Trump will apply these tariffs either symbolically, and deportations rather, I should say, symbolically or in a much reduced fashion. So that is par for the course for the Trump administration. Remember, he has gone from winning the previous election by targeting China to doing a deal with China, and then that deal breaking down, and then launching the trade and technology war with China, and so on. Similarly, he has gone from calling the president of North Korea, Kim Jong-un, all sorts of names, to calling him his greatest friend and writing him love letters and so on. So, I mean, that's the personality and persona he has cultivated. And I think that we will see something very different when he comes to office.
Here's one of the things I'd like to get your thoughts on is this. A lot of people have has looked at Donald Trump's cabinet and attempted to evaluate his policies based on his cabinet, right? And here are my thoughts. Throw them at you. That is traditional politics. Donald Trump is not traditional. He's not a politician, as it were, right? He's an entertainer first, right? And he's a business guy, and he's a big ego. Okay. Again, if we go to history, and this is what I keep calling it, this is his first draft. Look at last time. He gets a CIA person, 6 months, 8 months, that person's gone. It's replaced. The person here is moved to State Department. He's going through 3 or 4 of those. Then, his whoever's in charge of this, 2 or 3 of those he's going to go through. So this is the first draft. So my point is, you cannot evaluate Donald Trump by his cabinet like traditional politicians, because somebody's going to aggravate him. They're going to do what he wants. He's not going to like them for one reason or another, and he's going to fire them, and he's going to get another. He had this TV show, and it was like his big thing was, his line was, "You're fired," right? Well, that's the way he does politics. And my point is, what we're accustomed to is cabinet-driven politics. You get Jake Sullivan, you get Tony Blinken, and they say, Biden, we need to do this. Biden, God only knows if he even knows where he is, and they do it, right? Donald Trump is the opposite. He puts you in, and he says to a member of his cabinet, do this, and if they hesitate, he fires them. So I think evaluating Trump, you have to first look at him. In a way, as you said, he's an outsider. And look, he brings in, here's what I have to say, China. So we got these knuckle draggers in there, the Blinkens. We got to get missiles around China, and we got to blast them. And, the knuckle draggers they've got a club in their hand. You know, they're like, ugh, grog have club, grog hit enemy with club, right? Donald Trump, he's got Peter Thiel. He's got Musk. He's got these techies who big money with China. He invites Xi, unthinkable in the Biden administration. Xi's the enemy. You got to hit him over the head with a club. Trump says we got to bring Xi in here and let's invite him to the inauguration. I think the Trump faction of the ruling elite sees China as a money bonanza. And they're thinking, we're tech guys. We're building Teslas in China. We got Oracle or what have you in China. This is where we're going to make. I think in a way, the people that are funding, they want a level of rapprochement with China. I think they want the appearance that they're going at it with China. But I don't think that's what they really want. I think they're trying to fill their pockets. Trump is now saying crypto, crypto, crypto. We're going to make crypto a fortune. Again, the techie people love that. And I bet you the Trump people are buying crypto like all hell because they know they're going to drive it. Anyway, your thoughts on my evaluation from the perspective of not his cabinet, but the Thiels and the Musks and the people that are throwing their money. And now even you see Zuckerberg coming in like, oh, so this is the techno guys. Oh, I think we're all going to eat here. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's where, I think we'll just have to wait and see to some extent. So let me, because, the Zuckerberg element is exactly what I was thinking of when I said the house-trained capitalists are also donating to his slush funds of various sorts. But let's begin with a very concrete point, which is that, at one level, Trump is a clean slate, and big CEOs are going to write on that slate what they want to write collectively. To some extent, that's true. But I think there is a certain core of Trump, which is very much in sync with the likes of Peter Thiel or Elon Musk or Vivek Ramaswamy and so on. And what is that core? It is that they are part of this, what I've been calling the maverick capitalist class, the maverick CEOs. They are sort of a rung below the really, really big ones, although, of course, Elon Musk has personally become exceedingly wealthy. But on the whole, they are a rung below the really big CEOs, the establishment CEOs. And all they want is even more deregulation. And you see, they are not willing. See, the other CEOs are willing to put up with the appearance of a certain degree of regulation, so long as underneath that appearance, they get to do what they like. And in fact, what's more, they even get sort of a lot of under the appearance of regulation and control, they actually get favors from the government. So they are willing to, they have learned to play that game, and they realize that to some extent this game is necessary in order to tell American people that somehow everything is still working in their interests and so on. Of course, that pretense is falling apart now. And as we discussed with the assassination of that health CEO, that it shows that this appearance, this mask is completely shredded now. So what Trump represents is the CEOs who want just even more deregulation. After 40 plus years of deregulation, they want even more deregulation. They are complaining that government, which has been pared down to next to nothing. I mean, it's not like government expenditures have fallen as much, but the direction of government expenditure has changed completely from spending at least some money in the interests of ordinary people, in education, in health, in other social services, to completely against them and in favor of essentially just subsidies, for big corporations and arms spending and so on and so forth. So that directionality has completely changed, and despite that, they want more deregulation. And I think what they have in mind is, and again, this is something we were touching on earlier, the fact that people like Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy and so on are directly joining the government also shows us that another line is crossed between what we may call normal capitalist politics, in which capitalists usually rely on career politicians to represent their interests in politics, and now they don't need representation. They are in the government. And then what this shows us is that, historically we have tended to differentiate between the idea of what technically is called imperium, which is rule, the business of ruling, and dominium, which is ownership, private property. And what these people are trying to do is connect the two, because essentially what they're saying is, who needs the state when in fact we will create out of our vast private estates, vast private wealth, entire regions, entire jurisdictions which we will control, like the old company town in which your owner was also your ruler. And I think that's the kind of a situation they wish to create. It's kind of like, I'm told that I read at various places that Musk is completely like, he lives in this world of his kind of sci-fi world in which all sorts of things are possible and societies are reorganizing new ways. And I think that's the sort of thing that they have in mind. Of course, should such a thing happen, it would, well, first of all, it cannot happen uniformly all over the United States. So I think it's going to create new types of social tensions, new types of cleavages, and so on. But, the one phrase that kept running through my head when I heard about Trump's victory, because I'd been following, who is supporting Trump, particularly in the capitalist class and so on, is the phrase that kept running through my head is, the inmates have taken over the asylum. Essentially, all the unruly crowd that had to be controlled by sort of the big CEOs and the Democratic Party and so on, they have now got rid of their controllers. They have taken over the asylum and they're going to run it. So you can imagine what happens when the inmates take over the asylum. That's what we are going to see in the United States. God knows what will happen, but we're going to see that.
Let me throw another I don't know if it's different or the same, but another view of that at you. One of the things we kept hearing from Musk is, these people are going to start a nuclear war. They're going to kill us all. They're crazy. They're going to start World War III. We heard it from Trump. We heard it from a bunch of these tech billionaires who were saying, basically, they're going to start a war with China. That's crazy. Why? Because they're making a fortune off China. Not saying it's good, bad, or indifferent, not to judge it. I don't want anybody to think I'm on the anti-China train, because I absolutely am the opposite, right? But I think there was a certain amount of this. We pay a lot of money for you politicians. You're privileged, and your job is to be out there and do our bidding. You're supposed to pretend to the working class like you represent them. We're all for this big fraud, but you know who you represent, and the world is our playland. Now, don't screw it up, right? And that at some point, the super rich got to the point where they said, you're risking our lives. If you can't play with your toys properly, you can't have them. We're going to come in. You don't know what to do. You're risking everything. Sorry, you can't have your toys. Give them back. We'll run this thing since you don't know how. I kind of get a bit of a feeling listening to their rhetoric that the people, these powerful, because it's, as you said, you got the capitalists, you got these powerful tech billionaires. I got one other thing to it that I think is critical. They view themselves as outsiders. And you know how you know Indian culture, you know about class issue, right? They view themselves as this. We're new money. And you know how it is. When you get around old money, I don't care if you're richer than them. They don't know the proper etiquette in our society. They don't know how to do things. They don't know how we do things. Yes, they've got lots of money, but they're still dirty because they don't know, they're not part of the, if you're in the US, they can't trace their lineage back to the Mayflower. They're about their lineage, things like that. And also Trump, if you understand the class dynamics of New York, he's from Queens. So you've got these super rich people in the Upper East Side who are snooty riding around. Sure, he's got money, but he's from Queens. Ew. Yeah. Right? Don't come near us. He's dirty. He's not cultured. You see how Trump is. He's not cultured like they are. And they're like, oh God, yeah, he's got a lot of money. So, and he knows that and he feels that. He's an outsider from Queens. So when people are like, oh, he's a billionaire, come on, you really think he's a blue collar? He sees himself, based on his history, as being rejected by the East Side, Upper East Siders, as one of you dirty. He's no different than some poor person who works in the coal mines to them. So he does have, albeit extremely flawed, a view of himself as an outsider and as being rejected by this very snooty Upper East Side wealthy class. Anyway, your thoughts of that's a lot to throw at you, but
Well, I just want to say that, okay, so I'm not the first one to talk about the term fascism in
Mhm.
relation to the phenomena we are looking at in Europe, for that matter, in the AFD and so on, but also in relation to Trump and, for that matter, Johnson. So, and you see, if you think about it, in their time, people like Hitler and Mussolini were also small people who essentially made themselves useful to the capitalist classes. They showed that they could win elections in very troubled times when the establishment parties had lost their ability to do so. And so initially, the ruling establishment treated them as what they were. They were plebeians. They were, the riffraff. They were not worth, they were the unwashed masses, so to speak, part of that. So that disdain was always there, and that is often used by people to say, oh well, the real conservatives and the aristocrats, they didn't really favor Hitler and so on. Yes, they probably didn't, but when push came to shove, and when it became when it became a question of who would keep them in power, they were very happy to turn to the Hitlers and the Mussolinis and so on. And so in that sense, I think that, you see, when the ruling establishment breaks down, it takes an outsider to win elections. And I have no doubt that Trump feels all the things that you say, and so on. But I think that's and that's an important part of the mixture. But I would also then say that, this outsider type mentality is also relatively less, shall we say, responsible. They are not necessarily, the whole thing you're saying about wars, I don't think that their attitude to war is governed. Or let me put another counterpoint to yours. I mean, it's possible that you are right, but I tend to see slightly differently. I feel that what they say about, not fighting wars has nothing to do with, keeping the world safe. I mean, they probably, Musk is talking about going to Mars. Why? Because he thinks that he will be safe there. He will be safe there while the Earth is blown up in a nuclear war. So I don't think he's particularly concerned about preventing war or nuclear war. I think what he's concerned about is, why not exploit more business opportunities when we can, sort of thing. So, let and plus he has already invested in China, so of course he has an interest in not creating a war with China, etc. So these people are not particularly consequential thinkers. They are to some extent a little bit like overgrown children. That's partly why I keep thinking of, the inmates have taken over the asylum. They are not necessarily consequential thinkers. They're not necessarily long-term thinkers. They just want to do what they want to do. And indeed, their whole rage against government, this whole thing about the Doge, and the Doge, of course, refers to the Venetian Doges, which is, just the Italian word for duke, which is not very different from the word for duce, Il Duce, which was, of course, Mussolini. Anyway, let me come back to the reason they hate deregulation is because they just want to do what they want to do. They don't want anyone to stop them. So
Yeah.
they just want to be children. Um, and they want to have the freedom to do anything they like, whatever their mind comes up with. That's the and by the way, that does not apply to everyone else. One of the things you will also see in the case of people like Musk is they tend to have, for all the fact that they have won by getting the votes of working people in the United States, or at least many working people in the United States, the fact is they have only contempt for working people, for ordinary people. They are a select elite. They are really smart, according to them. They are really, whatever it is they think of themselves, certainly they think they're very smart. And that's all. That's their worldview. They're elitist to the core.
I certainly agree with you. You know what's interesting, and when you use this word fascism, right? Because the Biden people and all were like, Trump is a fascist. One of my definitions for fascism, one of many, is a commitment to war, right? A commitment, first and foremost, to war, to expansion, to economic expansion through war, to the claiming of, resources and other things through war, right? And when people have said, well, what about this leader of fascism? This, Biden, oh, this guy's a fascist, or that guy's a fascist. I've said, well, in the same way that there are variances in you say, okay, a democracy. Well, this country has a parliamentary system, and this, they have a Congress, or then there are variant times. A socialist country. Well, there are various types of socialist countries, right? In the same way, I put it like this: do you want strawberry, vanilla, or butter pecan fascism? Right? Clearly, to me, the green parties of Europe, the Schultzes and Baerbachs and Starmer, these people are, here's the proof. Who are they supporting in Israel, in Syria, in Ukraine? They're aligned openly with fascists, but saying we oppose fascism. So for those who say Trump's going to bring in fascism, we've already got a brand of fascism. I don't know what Trump's going to bring in, but the argument that the people here aren't fascists, to me, is preposterous when they're literally arming people who are goose stepping around screaming Sieg Heil.
Yeah, that I want to respond to that very important set of points you made by making 2 points. One is about what I will call structural fascism,
okay.
And another is about the whole issue of war and fascism. So I think that yes, we historically, because the classic cases of fascism we take to be German Nazism and Italian fascism. Yes, indeed, they were about war. But remember the period in which they emerged. They emerged in the early 20th century, in the interwar period. And it was a time when Italy was already, in any case, the sort of the little beggar of the imperialist crowd, that it didn't have very many colonies to begin with, and Germany had been deprived of colonies, and the expansionism of Nazi Germany was directly prompted by a desire to acquire in Eastern Europe, and at the expense of Russia, territories that would compensate for what Britain had in the rest of the world, the empire on which the sun never set. And so they, just as America had its Wild West and all that, and had a continent-sized economy, so Germany saw itself as acquiring the equivalent of what the British and the Americans had. They saw the territories to the east of them as their own Wild East, just as the Americans had the Wild West. So that's one element. That is to say, the expansionism was driven by an understanding which lay very deep in the minds of the ruling classes of the major imperialist countries, of which Germany was one until the First World War, that you need colonies in order to thrive. And certainly they are right. They did need colonies, and part of the reason why the Western imperialist powers are in trouble right now is that their ability to impose their imperial power over the rest of the world is declining, and declining very rapidly. So that's the first thing, is that yes, war, because for example, in India we have Modi, and of course Modi is being very belligerent vis-a-vis Pakistan, etc. But I don't think even I hope he certainly doesn't have the gumption to start a war with Pakistan. It would be quite disastrous, and certainly not with China. But anyway, they do love to make those noises. But that kind of expansionism gone mad was really a function of the German lack of colonies after 1919, and then of course Hitler's own the fact is, when the ruling classes of any country take refuge in a political phenomenon like Hitler's Nazi party, it becomes a question of the whole phenomenon of who rides the tiger dare not dismount. The tiger may take you anywhere, and Hitler took the German ruling class into a war that it could not win. But that's another whole matter. But that's the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing I want to say is that fascism, we also use the word populism and so on. And what both of these things denote is the rejection of a proper type of class politics, particularly vis-a-vis the working people. So we no longer have a proper class politics of the working people that genuinely represents their interests, that is rooted among them, organically connected with them in any way. So that applies to both the Biden, Trump, Clinton the Biden, Clinton, Obama Democratic Party, and to the Trumpian Republican Party. While the Trumpian Republican Party arouses more rabble, the fact is both political forces are structurally disconnected from working people. They are not organically linked to working people, but at the same time, they try to get them to vote for them, because naturally the working people are a majority, and you've got to get some section of the working people to vote for you. So in that sense, I would say, and practically every other aspect of fascism, that is to say, the maintenance of the power of not only the capitalist class, but a relatively small number of big monopoly capitalists, the ability to do that at the the willingness rather to do that even at the cost of a very high degree of repression, because what else do you call it but repression, when in the name of offering people healthcare, you are offering them essentially, as you are making people cannon fodder for the insurance industry and the healthcare industry and the pharmaceutical industry and what have you. So in a certain sense, I feel that there is to some extent, I think we have to apply the term to both sides.
Yes, 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 yes. That's why I said, various flavors. The last thing I wanted to ask you, and this is important. We've got a few minutes, but it's really important. And that is, recently, I have a lot of connections to Russia. I've done a lot of studying Russia, and I've been reading the Russia. I've watched the Russian media. You can learn a lot and listen to their speeches. The Russians are really prioritizing their relationship with India. It appears to me they're really working on burying the hatchet between India and Russia. India and China. That's critical with Russia, and they seem to be having incremental success. Okay, certainly we have our critiques for Modi, no shortage of them. But outside of him as the individual in his politics, we're talking about BRICS. We're talking about Trump. I think the Russians see, the future with Ukraine and their security. They see that in their sphere of influence on their border extended, right? Their physical border, but I think they see Ukraine as a strategic border. We've got to have a bit of a buffer zone between us and the crazies, right? Okay. But I also think they see their relationships with India and China, these other powerful countries, as in the future, an intricate part of their, like a defensive economic and a defensive political and diplomatic alliance that they have to have in concert with that. Like maybe to get a deal with Trump or whoever, if they can or can't, they may be willing to give up a little bit more than they would on the Ukraine thing, in recognition that if we can get China, India first and foremost, and then North Korea and some other small guys in, that this is a critical part maybe of our defensive border, whatever you want to call it, that maybe we didn't take into account in the past. But your thoughts on the Russians' apparent real super priority now of their relationship with India and of mending fences between India and China, that triumvirate of power.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, let me say that it has long been said that if India, China, and Russia are able to come together in a harmonious into harmonious relations, whether it is an alliance or not, it doesn't matter, but if they have good relations with one another, good economic relations, good political relations, I would say that the world would be an altogether far more peaceful place, because they would then as a group would be so dominant in the world that the ability of these, of the Europeans, who are ultimately no more than a kind of peninsula of the Eurasian landmass, and North America, which is kind of 2 oceans away in either side, to determine outcomes in the world would be very much restricted. So I have, the outcome is something to be dearly wished for, I would say. So that's the first point. The second point I'd like to make is that I think that, especially given that the ability of the West to attract India away from Russia and China, which it very much would like to do, is declining. And the first manifestation of that is the simple fact that instead of siding with the Americans, which I would say Modi and his party would have dearly loved to do, they are Indians are talking about multi-alignment and so on, as a articulation of their foreign policy doctrine. But in reality, the truth is much shabbier than that. India is reliant on Russian cheap oil from Russia at the moment, and of course, so India must, and the West has nothing comparable to offer. India has also historically had good defense relationships with Russia, although I don't think that matters as much, because over the last 20 odd years, since the first time this party came to power in the late 90s and early 2000s, the BJP was in power from 1998 to 2004 in an earlier format. It was a coalition government. They didn't have a parliamentary majority, but nevertheless, it was in government. And they since then have been diversifying India's defense ties to include not only various European countries, but particularly Israel. And that's very, very important. So the common hatred of both Hindutva and Zionism for Muslims is the glue that holds them together. So that was happening, but India needs Russian oil right now. That it needs that more than ever before, because without Russian oil, India's energy prices would go through the roof, and India is very energy dependent. India has a bit of energy, but not enough. And certainly does not exploit solar as much as it could. But anyway, let's leave that aside. So this is working because of the weakness of the West, not because of anything, any inclination on the part of Modi. And then finally, I would say that India's position on the border disputes with China has historically been not tenable. I mean, I'm not talking about minor points. I'm talking about overall. Overall, what India has done, going back to the days of Nehru, and Nehru should have known better, but they have been defending what are essentially imperial lines on the map. Instead of engaging with China and saying, okay, we should really look after, what exactly will be lost or gained by, coming to some sort of mutually beneficial agreement. And what matters, I think China has always said, what matters is what is the welfare of the people who are living in these territories, not whether this territory as such, this piece of real estate belongs to you or us. And I think that's a very principled position to take. And on the basis of such principles, China has many countries it shares borders with, and it has resolved its border disputes with all of them except one. By contrast, India also has border disputes with many countries, and it has resolved none of them. So you can see a certain pattern here, and I would say that under the previous government, the government that ruled between 2004 and 2014, the Congress-led coalition government, there was some movement in the direction of coming to terms with China, and that so some good advances were made. But unfortunately, the UPA government did not dare to start evolving a different public policy discourse on the disputes with China, which it should have done. Because if you're going to come up with an agreement with China, you must justify it in some fashion in a public discourse. This the UPA government failed to do. And as soon as the BJP government was in power, things went downhill very rapidly. Now, yes, Russia has managed to make some kind of peace or some advance on peace between India and China. But this will remain very precarious as long as the BJP government is in power, because Modi and his ilk make a lot of political hay out of demonizing China and demonizing Pakistan. And neither of those two things will do if India, China, Russia are to come together.
I know you're out of time. Do you have to go now, or do you have time for one question?
I have time for a few more minutes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I did want to ask you about the UK politics, because I don't know much about it, and I know you're familiar with it and you spend a lot of time there. And the last I read was that there was something circulating online that millions of people have signed up to, saying we want Starmer out. They're in a world of trouble. I mean, they had the Tories in, and people were like, they're terrible, we're out. Well, their option was Starmer, and now they're like, oh my God, out of the frying pan into the fire. Are we in a pre-revolutionary period where the people have tried, okay, we've got vanilla doesn't work, chocolate doesn't work, and the imperialists have provided them with, two hands with the same glove. What happens next? Do you just vote the Tories back in and just start playing ping pong every 6 months? Britain's in a lot of trouble. Your thoughts?
Yes, I mean, you could say Britain is in a lot of trouble, or you could say with Mao something, I forget the exact words, but he said something like, there is great chaos under the heavens and the situation is excellent. So, so I would say that there is definitely something of that. Britain is really coming apart. The establishment's hold on Britain is coming apart because, as I say, if there's one country that has been even more zealously neoliberal than the United States, it has been Britain. They have privatized everything under the sun, including things like water supply. So with awful consequences, the railways, water supply, electricity supply, you name it, they have privatized it. And of course, now they are dealing with the fact that the companies that now own these public services and the public assets, or what should be public assets, have essentially laden them down with so much debt that they have become unviable. If you doubt what I say, just go to YouTube and look at videos about Thames Water. And you will know what I mean. This is the big company that provides water to all of us. I mean, I'm living under the jurisdiction of Thames Water, and basically it is a company that is the proud owner of a crumbling water supply infrastructure, crumbling sewage infrastructure, which it has no money to rectify, because over the last 20 for 30 years over which it has been privatized, it has laden down the corporate entity that is Thames Water with debt, not to make investments in improving the water supply and the sewage treatment and so on, but rather to pay big dividends to their shareholders. So you can see the mess we are in. Now, vis-a-vis Starmer, if you want, please go and take a look at the short piece that I did with Alan, my husband, and a friend of ours, Carlos Martinez, when on the day after the elections, where we sat and watched the election results come in together, and we just wrote an analysis of it. And our prediction, our view was that basically Starmer was the last hold that the British establishment has over politics. And Starmer has won such a narrow victory. It was not so much that Starmer won a victory as the Tories essentially went down to entirely deserved defeat. So that, in this allegedly landslide victory in which the Starmer Labour Party won a fairly hefty majority of seats, this has been won on a vote count, the total vote count in the UK, which is less than what Corbyn won when he lost the election in 2019. So you can imagine how sad things are. Plus, Corbyn, along with 5 other independents, won against Labour as well as the Conservatives in their respective constituencies. Keir Starmer won fewer votes than Jeremy Corbyn, who he hounded out of his own party, won in the neighboring constituency. So all of this shows you that Labour was elected already. There was absolutely no honeymoon. Labour went directly from election victory and maybe an afternoon or two of grandstanding speeches from, from the hustings, so to speak, from the victory podium, and then they were thrown straight into problem after problem in which they are essentially announcing policies such as they are cutting fuel allowance for older people, and we are only beginning the winter now, and I wouldn't be surprised if in a month or two we are seeing headlines about this old person has died because he or she couldn't afford to heat their homes and so on. And this is only going to raise popular anger. They promised that they would not tax working people, but they have increased national insurance contributions. There's allegedly on employers, but of course, that's going to be passed on to workers. They have absolutely kept to their promise to corporate England, even though corporate England itself is no longer England or British. They're no longer English or British. They're actually, most of the big corporations here are owned by non-British entities. So you can see that it's definitely getting to be a point where a new political force is needed. And who knows? I mean, one of the hopeful respects, and I haven't followed exactly what is happening there, but I would say that if Corbyn, if the 5 independent MPs who won their elections despite Labour efforts to marginalize them because of their alleged anti-Semitism, and people like George Galloway and others come together, the left wing of the Labour Party, who I'm sure will be extremely unhappy in Starmer's Labour Party. I think if these forces come together, they could perhaps create something new. There is absolutely no doubt that ordinary people, if you see the pro-Palestinian, pro-Gaza demonstrators that are out practically every weekend, you will see that the level of dissatisfaction is huge. Like in the United States, ordinary people know that their governments are lying to them. The situation is definitely explosive.
Well, thank you very much. I certainly appreciate you taking time. I know you've been busy, but hopefully I can get you in here weekly. Maybe we can get Michael Hudson back next time. We can talk to him and have another great talk. And this is interesting stuff. I do want to get your thoughts at some point. I'd like to talk with you and get your thoughts on crypto. I want to get your thoughts on that. It's very, very interesting now. Right now, to be quite frank, I mean, it's a smart investment, at least for the near term, because Trump's going to come in and he's going to make crypto go through the roof, at least for a while, which is interesting stuff. And what that tells us about the dollar. Go ahead.
No, just be sure to get out as quickly as well, because there's never been, you see, one of the points I always make is that crypto is not a currency. It's an asset, sure. And it's an asset based on a sort of Ponzi type structure. So, it can go up and come down because it has nothing to support it. It can fluctuate wildly, because anything with a proper base of support would not fluctuate so wildly, and currency certainly cannot fluctuate. So any commodity or any commodity cannot fluctuate so wildly. Any currency should not fluctuate so wildly, because you would not hold such a currency. So the only things that fluctuate so wildly are speculative assets, and that's what crypto is.
And that I've said something. We're not going to be much longer, but one of the things I've said about crypto is it's an honest version of today's American stock market. For instance, because look, it's only worth what someone will give you for it. That's it. It's worth. There's nothing behind it. If somebody will give you $1 and you bought it for 99 cents, you make a penny. If nobody wants to buy it, then it's worth nothing. That's honest asset. Now, there was a big, I forgot the name of it, GameStop, right? And some people on Reddit, and they figured out how to drive the price up. But at the time, it was COVID. GameStop was shut. Everything was shut. The malls were shutting down, as they are all shutting down. Nobody's using the malls anymore. GameStop was worthless. There was no bricks and mortar. There was nothing behind it. The people on Reddit figured out, just like crypto, well, if we can manipulate it and it goes up and get people to give us more than we paid for it, we'll make money. When you look at so many of these auto companies that are just so upside down, selling $85,000 pickup trucks, for God's sake, not selling these pickup trucks, it's obvious that if you own stock in Ford, GM, or Dodge, it's worthless unless somebody will give something for it. So your thoughts on my belief that at least crypto's honest that there's nothing behind it. These others pretend that there's bricks and mortar when really there's a company that's so upside down in debt. If you actually knew what their ledgers look like, you'd never buy anything from them. But people don't know what their ledgers look like, so they will actually buy it.
I think that's one way of putting it. The other way of putting it would be that like Ford or whatever, Chrysler, their shares are very hyped, and there's next to nothing supporting that. But crypto is all hype,
right?
That's what you're saying, and that's what you're calling honest. I mean, fine. If that's what you mean, absolutely. But of course, a lot of people are led to think that crypto is somehow this kind of technological thing that is going to solve the currency problems of the world and so on. And that's partly why they believe in it. They think that it's going to be non-state money or etc. And it's not. There is no way you can have money without a state. This may seem disappointing to some people, but we can discuss that actually in the next show. And yeah, absolutely. Let's discuss crypto.
All right, sounds good. Dr.
Okay.
Desai, everyone can look and see radhikadesai.com. That's right below her name. Go there and you can find all of her good work. You can find all the things that she's doing, links to the videos, etc. She's doing great work. A lot of really good videos are out there with her, with Michael Hudson. So make sure you find all of that stuff and look at it. And thank you very much. Look forward to talking to you soon. Are you on X or those Telegram or anything
I
like that?
am, but I stink at social media. I'm sorry to say, so I don't really do very much. I'm there. I put out some things, but very few comments really.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. Don't forget,
Okay.
share this on all your social media platforms. As you probably know, I'm not on X. Mr. Free Speech can't figure out who I am for some reason. They can figure out how to deduct the money out of my account for my X account, but for some reason, I can't log into X because they said they can't verify me as the owner of the account that they charged me for. And as of December 20th, I've got plans to address that. So at any rate, thank you, everyone. Share this on all your social media platforms.